recent conflicts within the Middle East has its roots far back within history. When we look at the general instability of the region itself, it mainly boils down to a few factors. The first, most obvious one is that the Middle East is a very resource-rich um, area within the world, especially in regards to the black gold or oil and other valuable resources that come with oil, like gas. You know, um, that has been the reason why so many global powers are interested in asserting dominance within the region by means of installing military bases and initiating things like invasions, which also happen from time to time within the region itself. When we actually look at history, the Middle East has always been plagued by war. Um, Other reasons include like tribalism. As we know, Middle Eastern culture, its native culture is really reliant on tribes, on uh, nationalism, sometimes even put to the extreme. That's why things like civil wars and obviously wars between neighboring states become common, especially when fueled by external forces. When taking into account the influence that other major world power has in trying to assert their presence within the region. But the thing I want to talk about is the other main reason for why the Middle East is such an unstable region in the world. Um, and when we look at it from a religious point of view, the Middle East is home uh, to is the birthplace of many world religions, many dominant religions, the current day, in particular the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and of course Judaism, which has their roots all cemented within the Middle East. Abraham was Middle Eastern. He was yeah, a Middle Eastern guy, and obviously all those three religions came from his descendants. So these three religions they fight to have their dominance, as we could see in history, throughout history, through things such as the Crusades, or through things such as the conquest by Salahuddin, or maybe the various crusades that tried to cement Christian presence within the region to expand Christendom, and in particular gain control of the Holy Land. Obviously, you have cases of Muslims doing the same thing. The Ottomans, Umar ibn Khattab, he did conquest to conquer the Holy Land, Palestine, which is and has been a crucial area in terms of some people call it the land of the prophets. That's for a reason. Most of the prophets from the Abrahamic religions were sent down upon the people of Israel, which obviously inhabited the land, the Holy Land. Um, there are significant places of worship. The Muslim have Masjid al-Aqsa. The Christians have the various churches located within the Holy Land itself. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of Nativity, and there's a lot of there's these places of historical importance within the region. It makes sense that throughout history and to the present day, various religions, especially from those three, has been competing to gain control of this area. The Jews are no exception. The great uh, kings of Israel, David, Solomon, they resided within the area, obviously, as we know, and they left a great deal of artifacts and places of religious and historical importance, such as Solomon's palace, Solomon's temple, sorry, which obviously the Jews has been working very hard to try to uncover. Um, they have been excavating grounds. These are important places of worship for Jews. When we see it from a more detailed historical point of view, ever since the Jews was driven out from Judea itself, from the area itself, they experienced a diaspora. They went to they spread out through various places around the world, and did not assimilate. They kept their lineage as Jews do. So they established Jewish communities in Ethiopia, and mainly throughout the various parts of Europe, which Jewish presence uh, gained significant traction. Um, the places where they seek refuge, or where they called home, obviously had some natives. Jews had somewhat of a bad reputation among the natives, the people that that live originally live in the places that they actually go. They're minorities, but they have terrible reputations for they're good at doing business. They do business a lot, and sometimes they're accused of doing shady practices and things of the such that incite the people living in the host countries to sort of prosecute them, or to hold uh, certain prejudices against them. So they were prosecuted. Jews was regarded as corrupting the host country. We see that in Germany. That's why Hitler tried to eliminate the Jews entirely. Obviously, that's racist. These are based on racist prejudices, but the Jews had reputations for committing shady business practices, especially that in terms of lending out loans and interest rates and so on and so forth. Um, and so the Jews were prosecuted, and in that time, this continued on for several centuries until um, in the 1800s, uh, an Austrian author, a Polish author, I forgot where he was from. The dude who wrote Der Judenstaat, he wrote that book. That was given to the Rothschilds in Britain, a prominent Jewish guy, rich Jewish guy at the time, to establish an independent, self-governing Jewish state. This was a new idea because for the past few centuries, Jews has simply been roaming around without a homeland, and to this day, some Jews believe that's an integral part of the Jewish identity, that they were never meant to have a homeland, and therefore establishing a state of Israel in itself was flawed since the beginning. But Der Judenstaat was posed not as a way to capture the homeland, to capture the promised land, so to speak, but it was secular. If you look at it, if you read it from an objective point of view, it doesn't really put that much emphasis on the religious need to capture the Holy Land, the religious need to uncover Solomon's temple or other religious goals, but it instead focused on the social aspect of being a Jew, of a person of Jewish descent, because the Jews never really married outside of other Jews. So they have sort of a close lineage, which and with their terrible reputation, people tended to prosecute them. Um, Therefore, the idea to establish a state for Jews was conceived not from religious necessity, but from a social one. It was simply created. The first ideas was simply directed to having a Jewish state, so they no longer felt prosecution. Um, but that's why we also see in the early inception of the Jewish Council. I forgot what it was called. No, this organization made to establish a Jewish state. That's why they considered places like Argentina, places like New Zealand, like Uganda, to establish a Jewish state, places that could be bought because they had money. They're rich people, but religious objectives wasn't really on their mind on the early stages of the inception of the Jewish state. However, religious rhetoric soon grew within them, and they settled down on having to actually establish a a nation in the Holy Land itself, in Palestine, in Judea, or whichever you may call it. Um, Even though this, I don't know what really caused this, because the early movement was a secular one, but and the government of early Israel, once Lord Balfour has given the green flag, so to speak, for Israelis to actually take control of the Holy Land. The Labour government, the Labour Party, which was very dominant in early Israeli politics. They were a secular party. They didn't really have religious incentives to sort of like uncover the Solomon's temple, or putting much emphasis on the Holy Land at all. Um, they more so did have the goal of simply establishing a peaceful state for the Israeli people. But of course, this era of the dominance of the Labour Party soon faded with the rise of more right-wing rhetoric. Uh, Even though they did establish the state through violent means, it was a clear invasion. 1946. Oh my God, I'm not good at remembering dates, but it was a violent takeover of the area from Arab hands into Jewish ones. They did establish Israel through violent means. I do not deny that. They were violent, inherently violent. The state is inherently built on violence. That's something that no one can deny. But the point I'd like to stress is they did not have religious incentives to establish an independent nation for Jews. That only came much later, when the rise of religious Zionism, that was called secular Zionism, which was simply to establish a Jewish state, not based on religious principles, but on social ones. That Jews needed a sovereign state in order to not be prosecuted. But obviously, as uh, things progressed, and as the Labour Party sort of lost its grip on the Israeli parliament, uh, right-wing parties such as the current ruling parties, Netanyahu's Likud party, and even more extremist ones such as religious Zionism, uh, Otzma Yehudit, and other more right-wing parties, they sort of held a strong grip on Israeli politics since the 90s, and Netanyahu's party himself, the Likud party, it has been relatively consistent in its power, since 2009, 2010 till 2025. That's 15 years total that Netanyahu says that almost has been constantly in power as prime minister, which is insane. Like that's like a dominance, such a right-wing dominance, and obviously the right-wing party is more inclined to religious values. Religious Zionism. It's in the bloody name, but they stress the existence of a promised land to the Jewish people. That was not really stressed when the Labour Party was in rule. So yeah, um, religious Zionism is a relatively new development in the progression of Israeli politics, but its effects could be seen since the beginning. Its dominance is new, but its existence and influence is very old. The foundation of the state of Israel was not a religious one, but religious values definitely seeped into it, and the decision to establish a nation solely on the land of Judea, on the Holy Land, on the Promised Land, was influenced obviously by religious decisions, even though the basis itself wasn't inherently religious. Yeah. But that's why we see policies, Israel push like seeking for diplomacy under the Labour Party. Israel was relatively tame, so to speak. They pushed for diplomacy. They had proper negotiations actually going. Uh, However, under more right-wing rule, especially under Netanyahu's Likud party, we could see that negotiation efforts has essentially been nullified. Um, Netanyahu himself, he said just a few days ago that he was not willing to compromise on half measures. I think that's what he said, meaning that he would not negotiate. Essentially, he's just going to put out terms, and yeah, it's a zero-sum policy. And when we look at the other side, what's happening within Palestinian politics. Uh, Before the I don't remember dates, but when the Labour Party of Israel was in rule, the landscape of Palestinian politics was also vastly different. The PLO was a much more um, held a much more strong grip on the proceedings of the state. And the PLO, as we know, is a much more open organization. They were much more willing to operate negotiations to actually find middle measures, even though they weren't really successful by any large amounts. But they did try, and they did cover some ground when pushing for proper efforts of diplomacy and trying to find middle grounds with Israel. Um, Obviously, they lost a significant portion of their power within Palestinians themselves, and they were essentially defeated by Hamas, which, as we know, is a much more active organization, to speak in military terms. Their main form of resistance was uh, through armed attacks and through armed efforts targeted directly at Israel, whereas the older PLO, they were more focused at diplomacy, and it reflects in their respective policies. This progression from Israeli politics becoming more right wing and more religious, more extremist, so to speak, especially with Netanyahu in power for what 15 years now. It's becoming sort of a zero-sum policy. Hamas is, despite them also they're relatively lenient in how they negotiate. Just a few days ago, um, Hamas publicly stated that they were willing to let go of any of of all hostages taken in October 7th, in turn for Israeli stopping the war altogether. Um, they were met with Netanyahu's response, Netanyahu's rejection. He essentially wanted Hamas to be completely ousted, which I think is not reasonable. Netanyahu in this case, I think, is pushing for a bit too much, and yeah. But what we see, what we have seen in the last year is that both sides are taking uh, a zero-sum policy. That's what they call it, when neither sides are willing to compromise and uh, are both taking more and more increasingly extremist actions against each other. That's what we see. But obviously, I think that was the pattern that has been going on for the past decade or so, the past 15 years also. But just in the few weeks, I believe that Hamas has gotten, especially they have been more pressured, with the ongoing war on Gaza City. I think Khan Yunis is now the war front for the war in Gaza. So as we know, Israeli troops re-entered the Gaza Strip and performed an offensive on Gaza City, to Khan Yunis, to places of the such, and they essentially pressured Hamas to actually accept they essentially accepted the U.S. draft of the diplomatic efforts. They accepted without terms, but Netanyahu, obviously, he has a directive in mind. That's what I think personally. Netanyahu has a clear directive to take complete control over the Gaza Strip, which we cannot deny that's simply his incentive. It shows in his policy, rejecting the very, very reasonable terms set up by Hamas and mediators, in this case Qatar and the United States. Even the UN itself has tried to uh, pressure Israel to ending the war, obviously due to certain humanitarian concerns within the Gaza Strip itself. Mass hunger, food is becoming a very important issue. The UAE is said to be able to supply water, but as of now, both water and food uh, are in great scarcity, and that is in no subject to change in the foreseeable future. And that I believe is a big problem, and that is also why the UN has sort of pressured Israel into ending the war. But instead, Israeli officials responded by establishing this um, I think it's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF or something like that. That's a foundation made, a non-government organization made by the Israeli government. So it's not non-governmental; it's independent, but it was established by those involved with the Israeli government, um, and it has gotten into much scrutiny in the past few months, especially with the rise of deaths of Palestinians uh, who were killed in the process of getting to these distribution centers set up by Israelis themselves. So people are accusing the GHF of simply not being a humanitarian foundation, but simply as a tool, as a systematic tool to murder Palestinians, essentially. I believe that the solution for this conflict, as it has been for ever since this thing started, is a two-state solution. That seems most plausible to me, and that's actually Germany and France um, are backing the existence of a two-state solution. But obviously, as we could see, Netanyahu is not willing to compromise. So I do not see a future in which a two-state solution would be realized. Yeah. Um, the most likely outcome is the complete and total takeover of the Gaza Strip, which would eliminate all presence of Hamas within the Holy Land itself, which is the most likely outcome of this war.